All good. We're on 60B3. 60B3, all the way on the bottom. Okay, we're up to Ibaya Lahu. Okay, so that's the first wide line on 60B3. That's Samach Amid Bays, all the way on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the bottom. Okay, so now we're talking about things about the Korban Pesach, whether it's brought on the Erev Pesach or whether for some strange reason the guy got a brain freeze and decided to bring his Korban Pesach the rest of the year. And he has different thoughts. And what happens to that Korban when your thoughts go off the rails? One of the things to remember is that a Korban Pesach the rest of the year can become a shalomim. It can, because in essence, a Pesach is a shalomim, but obviously it is a Korban Pesach on the Erev Pesach. It's a Passover sacrifice, Erev Pesach. The rest of the year, when it's not meant to be a Pesach, it could become automatically a shalomim when a guy blows it in the way he's thinking. So here we go like this. Ibayaluhu, they asked, Pesach sheshachtu b'shai yemois hashana b'shinui bali. So, for some reason, Ruvain decided in the middle of nowhere he's going to put aside a behema to be an animal, a sheep, to be his Korban Pesach. And then, worse than just setting it aside, he decides it's Shabbat, it's Tu B'Shvat, good time to go ahead and shech the Korban Pesach. So he goes ahead and he shechs the animal for Korban Pesach. The thing is, in giving it over to the kohen for the Korban Pesach to shech, the kohen goes ahead and has in mind Shimon. It's Reuven's animal, but he has in mind Shimon, another guy. Okay? In other words, he slaughters it not for the name of the guy who owns the Korban Pesach. So the Gemara says, Mahu, what's the din? Shinoi balim, do we say, Shinoi balim, kishinoi kochim dami, that, remember, not in its time, in the rest of the year, is Shinoi balim a change, an intent, a thought for the wrong owner? Is it like Shinoi kodesh, which is that this payment was put aside to be a Korban Pesach, and instead I have it in mind to be a shalomim, right? Which we say the din is umach shilei, with regard to a Korban Pesach that's shechted the rest of the year, when the Korban Pesach is not meant to be brought the rest of the year. So when I bring it the rest of the year and I say, even though I put it aside to be a Pesach, but at the end of the day I shechted it to be a shalomim, we say it's okay, the Korban could be brought. It doesn't achieve atonement for the owner, but it is allowed. It is a legitimate Korban. Do we say just like Shinui Kodesh the rest of the year in Pesach, where I slaughter it for the name of something else, for the name of a shlomim? So too with regard to changing of the Shinui Balim, where I do it for the wrong owner. That would also be that would render the Pesach valid as well. It wouldn't achieve atonement, but it'd be valid in that I would be able to sprinkle its blood on the altar, or not. Says the Gemara, Amar Papa, says Amar Papa, Amina Lishmati Kamei Rava. I made the following argument in front of Rava. Hoyul, since Vishinoi Kodesh Posel Bismanai, that Shinoi Kodesh invalidates in its time. Meaning, if it's Erev Pesach, it's Yud Dalet Nisan, and you take the animal that you put aside to be a Korban Pesach, and in your mind, for some reason, you have a brain freeze, and you shecht it, the shame of Shlomim, right? You change its Kedusha from a Pesach to a Shlomim, it's Fafuch, it's puzzle, it's no good. On its day, on Yud Bismanoi, on Yud Dalet Nisan, Vishinoi Balim Posla Bismani, and the same thing that if you bring if it's Ruvain's Korban Pesach, and for some reason the Kohen has in mind Shimon on Erev Pesach, that's it. It's blown. It's invalidated. We can now make the another analogy. Mashinui kodesh, just like what do you call a change in holiness from one carbon to another carbon, a thought, an intent from changing it from one carbon to another carbon. Sheposloi bizmanoi, where in its time, in its proper time, such a thought to switch the name of which carbon you bring in it for will make it invalid. Nonetheless works the rest of the year. So if in this month of Teve, of Shvat, I decide on Tu B'Shvat to shech this carbon which I put aside for a carbon Pesach, I shechted 2 months early, and I have it in mind for a Shlomim, it works. The Shlomim is Mahani. Okay, the Shlomim works. Shinoi Balim, so to Shinoi Balim, Sheposloi Bizmani, that also invalidates in its time on Yud Dalid Nisan, on Erev Pesach. If you bring it for the wrong owner, it's Ruvain's Korban Pesach, and the Kohen has in mind Shimon, it's blown, right? But at the same time, Achshina La'achizmani, it should also be good. It should be valid and not in its time, which means, once again, if I decide to bring this Korban Pesach for some strange reason on Tu B'Shvat, and I have it, it's Ruvain's carbon, but I have it in mind for Shimon, that in reality it becomes a Shlomim for Shimon, not that he gets atonement for it, but that it could be brought all the way through onto the Mizbeach.
Okay. Where you holding?
The bottom of Samach Amid Beis, literally the last 2 lines of Samach Amid Beis. But Amruli, and Rava said to me, Lloyd, no, the cases are not analogous. You're right. A Korban Pesach, Shinui Kodesh, that you change in your mind the name of which carbon you bring in for on your Dalit Nisan blow, makes it invalid the rest of the year. It doesn't make it invalid. Nonetheless, you cannot compare that same idea to Shinoi Balim, when you have a change in your mind from one owner to another owner. Bamali says, Loi, if you want to talk about the idea of change of holiness from a carbon you have, from what's actually a Korban Pesach, but you have in mind the Shlomim, she came to Sulai Begufai, because that becomes a psul in the goof of the carbon, in the actual carbon. You went ahead and mislabeled the carbon, the sacrifice. The sacrifice was labeled originally as a Pesach, and you came along, and now in your mind, you've now changed it in its essence from a Pesach into a Shalomim. Okay? That's a Gavra change, essentially. An essence change. Vishini ba'arba avoidus, and it applies to all 4 blood avoidus equally. Meaning that if I made this change in my mind, my mind got all mixed up from one carbon to another one, whether I did it by the shechita, or I only did it by the Kabbalah, the receiving of the blood, or by the halicha, or carrying the blood towards the altar, or by the zerika, or the sprinkling of the blood. It doesn't matter. In any one of the 4 possible avoidance in the Beis Hamikdash, if at that point I make a shinui kodesh, for some reason I said, I am now going to carry the blood l'shem shlomim instead of a Pesach. It works. It passes on Erev Pesach. It passes on Erev Pesach. Either one. We're now on the daf Samach Aleph Amid Aleph. Vishinui la'achamisa, and it even applies after the death of the owner. Rashi says right on top, the top Rashi on 61a1. Shinui la'achamisa mace. If the person who owns the carbon Ruvain passes away, Benoi, his son, may be carbon Aviv. His son brings the sacrifice of his father. The im shachtu shaloi l'shmai, and if you slaughter it not for the person's name, Loy olo l'shem chayvo. He does not go towards his responsibility of what he had to bring. V'achrayis achkarbin mutal al nichsei hameis, and therefore the achrayis, the responsibility of bringing the carbon, is on the estate of the dead person. V'tzarich lahevi acher. He has to bring another carbon. V'shinui carbon b'tzibur ki carbon yochid. And a carbon tzibur is like a carbon yochid. V'shin, and the Gemara says, V'shinui b'tzibur ki yochid. And this applies to the sacrifices of a community as it applies to the sacrifices of an individual. Do you want to say the same thing? You want to make a comparison that just like Shini Kodesh, when you change the name from one carbon to another carbon, that we said, if this happens on Erev Pesach, it's invalid, but it happens the rest of the year, it becomes a shlomim.
It's kosher.
Same thing with regard to Shinoi Balim when you change up the names. It's Ruvain's carbon, and you have in mind Shimon on Erev Pesach, it wouldn't work, but you'd like to say it would work the rest of the year. But I'll show you something. Shinoi Kodshim has certain properties that Shinoi Balim does not have. Toima b'Shinoi Balim, do you want to say the same thing with regard to a change of ownership, meaning in your mind? You had it in mind for a different owner. The ain puts pasulai begufai. Its invalidation is not in the sacrifice itself. The invalidation is in the people bringing the sacrifice. The sacrifice still has the name. It's a carbon Pesach. You didn't change it from a carbon Pesach. You changed it from Ruvain to Shimon. That's not a change in the goof of the animal. That's a change in the other people. That's a fundamental difference. Also, there ain't arba avoidis, and it doesn't apply to all four avoidis. It doesn't apply to all four avoidis. In other words, it only applies to zerika, right? By all other karbonis, not carbon pesach. The whole thing is only by zerika, by the sprinkling. So in other words, if you sprinkle it, it becomes, because the sprinkling achieves the kapara. Sprinkling, the zerika, is what achieves, sprinkling on the four corners of the mizbeach is what achieves the atonement. So in other words, yes, you have to bring a shkita. Yes, you have to receive the blood, and yes, you have to transfer the blood to the altar. But none of those triggers the atonement for the owner of the animal unless you do the sprinkling. Right? And that's Dafkid, and Imkain, by Shinoi Balim, is only by a change in ownership. The effect of a change of ownership to passel, to invalidate a carbon, is only by Zerika. It's only by Zerika. Since the whole reason that the person is bringing it is to achieve kapara, to achieve an atonement. Therefore, the most important thing to him is the zerika. Therefore, Shinui Balim is the mistake. If you have in mind Shinui Balim when you're carrying the blood, or when you receive the blood, that doesn't passel it automatically, that doesn't invalidate the carbon. The invalidation with regard to Shinui Balim is at the point of zerika. Obviously, carbon Pesach is the one exception to that rule, because the entire carbon Pesach is in fact not for kapara, for atonement.
For eating.
In fact, it's for eating. Since the whole carbon is brought for eating. And as we're going to see, that idea is the one great fundamental difference between the carbon Pesach and every other sacrificial thing that we bring. The laws are completely different, which we'll get to a little further on the Amid. But here, since carbon Pesach is all in the eating, therefore the Shinui, whether of Shinui Kodshim, whether you switch from which name it's being brought for, or for which owner it's being brought from, that's in all four avodas. But with regard to all other kabbanis, Shinui Balim only has an effect to invalidate only by the sprinkling, only by the zrika. Masha Enken Shinui Kodesh, which has an effect at any given point of the four steps. Okay, so And further, the einoi la'achamisa, and it doesn't apply after the death of the original owner, because it's impossible to have a change of ownership by what he called by it's impossible to have a change of ownership. Essentially, Rashi says further down the page, about 5 lines towards the bottom of the skinny lines.
If you're dead, you're not an owner.
The
That's
ain't Shambhala Olav, exactly. If there is no owner on it, Me'acha Shemeis, after he dies, V'im Shinoi Shemai Kosher. Therefore, if you change the name, it's kosher. Because if you meant to bring your carbon Pesach and then you're not here anymore, obviously you can't be on the animal. So that can't be a problem for you. The ain't B'tzibu Ki B'yochid, and you can't and it does not apply to sacrifices of the community as it applies to the individual, because it's impossible to have shinui balam and a change of owners on a communal sacrifice. You know why? Because in a community, everyone is on the carbon. So Reuven is on it and Shimon is on it. So if originally I started with Reuven and I switched my mind to Shimon, so what? Shimon is on this carbon, just same way that Reuven is. It's very simple. It's like a shul. A shul is a 501c3, a non-profit. What does it mean, a non-profit? It means nobody owns it because everyone owns it. Everybody has a chelik in the shul. Okay? So that's the idea behind it. A communal sacrifice is a 501c3, is a non-profit sacrifice, because it belongs to nobody, which is another way of saying it belongs to everybody. If it belongs to everybody, obviously I can't have a change of owner. Who am I changing it to? To another guy who's also an owner. So therefore, you see, it turns out that a shinui kodesh, a change in holiness, in changing the names, is clearly more chamor, is more severe than the intention to switch to a change of owner. So in that case, you can't do a comparison one to the other. And the Gemara happens to say, the tarte lavdafka, even though 2 of these 4 points are not exactly correct, because I can slug them up, I can do away with them. Tarte miyadafka. 2 of them are set in stone, so that kodesh, shinui kodesh, the change in holiness is clearly strong, is more stricter than the change in ownership.
Yeah.
What are the 2 cases where it's not so ironclad? The Maishin of Rishini Balam Deloy have a psula begufai. Why are you saying that? A change in owner is not an invalidation in the goof, in the sacrifice itself. It's only
What happened? Can't hear. We can't hear you.
I know. We can't hear you either.
Also, it's only taking place in my brain.
Back.
It's only an
Yitzchak, we couldn't hear you. Can you?
Oh, yeah, I'll say it again.
Yeah. Say it again. Yeah.
We just said that Shinu Balam logically is just a problem in intent in your mind, that I'm flipping it from Ruvain to Shimon. Shinu Kaidish Nabi Psula Machshava Ba'almahu is also just a simple exchange in Machshava. In other words, I start off thinking it's a carbon Pesach. In my mind, I'm switching it to a Shlomim. So in that can't be the problem. So the fact that you wanted to say that Shinu Kaidish is in the goof, is in the actual animal, and Shinu Balam is not in the animal, only in the
same thing, yeah.
The instance is it's all the same thing. So that one isn't ironclad. One is more stricter than the other. Further, you wanted to say with regard to a change in owner, it's not a problem. It doesn't invalidate if the original owner passed away. Why? Because we have somebody. Pinchas says, "Yay shinoi balim liyachamisa." There is shinoi balim after death, because he says like this. says after the person passes away, he says like this: the Yairish, the inheritor, becomes the owner of this carbon. Somebody owns this carbon. The father went ahead and put aside this carbon to bring this animal to bring as a sacrifice. He passes away. That animal now passes on to his inheritors. Well, now that it passes on to the inheritors, that the aim is kodesh already because the father had it in mind to bring for an animal. So the inheritor now has to bring it for an animal. So if you go ahead,
For a carbon.
if to bring it for a carbon. So if the Yairish brings this behemoth and the kohen has in mind somebody else, well then the Yairish is not going to get his atonement. Okay, so therefore, the same thing over here. So regarding those two, they're not so ironclad.
Doesn't.
It's not a proof that one is stricter than the other. But
Right.
But the last 2 points, that what it called the Eina Ba'arba Avoidis, it doesn't apply to all four Avoidis. Only Shina Balam only applies to Zerika. Masha'ekin Shina Kaidish applies to all four Avoidis. And Eina B'tzibu B'yochid, that obviously Shina Balam, a change in onus, does not apply by a communal sacrifice, while Shinoi Kodesh does invalidate if you change the name of a communal, if the community needed to bring a shlomim and instead you changed its name to an asham, you blew it. So therefore it's clearly that at least on two things, Shinoi Kodesh, the change of the holiness of the name to the chain, is more stricter than the change of the name from Shinoi Balaam from Ruvain to Shimon. So the Gemara says, Ela Omarava. This is how we're going to explain this. Pesach sheshachtu b'shar Yemais Hashana. A Pesach that for some strange reason the guy goes ahead and slaughters the rest of the year. He slaughters it on Tu B'Shvat, right? Hashana b'shinoi balim, with an exchange of the owner. In other words, it's Ruvain's animal, and for some reason he gives it over to the kohen, and the kohen shechs it and slaughters it. For Shimon, Nasa Kemi She'ein Loi Balim Bismanoi is considered as if it does not have an owner when offered in its proper time, upasul, and therefore becomes pasul. In other words, says Rava, this is at the end of the day, it passes. The change of ownership is an invalidating reality. He says it's just the basic thing. A carbon has two parts. A carbon has the name of itself. What is it going to be? And it has to be attached to an owner. Once you disattach it, because who gave it its original name? The original owner. So Rava says, who gave it its original name? The owner. You can't go ahead and decouple the one who gave it its name and say, okay, so that now the one who gave it its name, now it's definitely a shlomim, or now it's definitely a chatas, but the owner, the one who labeled it, is not as important when it comes down to it. You can't do it. At the end of the day, one affects the other, and it's possible. Very good.
Right.
Now we're up to 61A2, the Mishnah. And
by the Bismanoi, it cashes it.
Right. So, but Pesach is the unique situation that where the rest of the year, if I shecht it is carbon Pesach, not for its name, but for the name of a shlomim, the rest of the year goes for a shlomim. And the reason for that is, once again, like we said yesterday, because a carbon Pesach, a sacrificial offering, is in essence a shlomim. It really is a shlomim.
Right.
Everything that you do with it is exactly the same as a shlomim. It's slaughtered in the same place. It's kachim kalim. It has a lesser holiness. It is what it is. It's exactly the same. Most of the animal gets eaten, just like a shlomim. So in essence, it's a shlomim. Since there is no such thing as a carbon Pesach except on Yud Daled Nisan, on Erev Pesach, obviously the rest of the year, it can't be a carbon Pesach. So by default, it becomes a shlomim. That's essentially the issue. Says the Mishnah, if he slaughtered it for those who are not able to eat it. Meaning, remember, a carbon Pesach has these few rules. The carbon Pesach is slaughtered for the idea that the actual Pesach will be eaten the night of Pesach at the Seder. At the Seder, Sli Eish, Matzahs, Umiroirim Yoichlu. We'll eat the carbon Pesach together with the matzah and the maror. In other words, Hillel sandwich. The Hillel sandwich, the first sandwich in history, right, which was matzah, maror, with the piece of the carbon Pesach. That's the whole. So the whole reason why we shecht it is for eating it. Now, so therefore, when I slaughter it, it has to be slaughtered, obviously, for people who could
eat it.
Who could eat it. But the same thing also is, you have to remember, before the slaughtering, you have to register on it. You have to sign up. You have to sign up like the vaccine. In order to get the vaccine, you got to sign up. So you have to find the carbon to go ahead and sign up on it before the actual slaughtering. So the Mishnah says as follows: if he slaughtered it for those who are unable to eat it, as we're going to see, this means a chayla or zaken, somebody who's sick or is very old and can no longer chew. He doesn't have the teeth anymore to chew the carbon Pesach. Or for those who are not registered on it. He's a nice guy. He says, I know you're supposed to register. You got to run at 6 o'clock in the morning and be the first person on the website before it crashes, right? But I'll do it for you. Don't worry about it. I'm going to have in mind all the people who are not registered. Ule arelim, or for uncircumcised people, the pasuk clearly says that only circumcised. Now again, if they're not circumcised, why are they bothering with the carbon Pesach? If they're not being Orthodox Jews and they don't care about getting a milah. But the answer is because this is the unfortunate case where, unfortunately, this is a person who had two siblings before him who got a bris milah and unfortunately away, had hemophilia or whatever it is, and passed away from the circumcision. When the third child arrives, the halacha is the third child is not circumcised. Nonetheless, because he's not circumcised, the carbon Pesach he can't eat from, because the pasuk says, "Kol arel lo yachol." No uncircumcised can eat it. When it says no uncircumcised, it means no matter what the situation. So we're talking about an Orthodox, from person who knows all the halachas and knows he can't have it. And yet, so the person who's shechting is feeling bad about this oral, wants him to be Mekayim the mitzvah of carbon Pesach. So at least he has in mind for him what he called he shechts the carbon Pesach, he slaughters the carbon Pesach with these people. Ula Tameim, or for those people who are Tamei, right, who obviously cannot bring the first Pesach, they have what's called the Pesach Sheni. Later on, the second Pesach a month later. The answer is Puzzle. He just made the carbon Pesach invalid. However, if he does it, la'oichlav u'shaloi oichlav, he's very broad. He said, I'm slaughtering it for the people who could eat it, the regular guys, and also for people who can't eat it, the people who are sick and who are old and who can't chew. I'm slaughtering it for those who did sign up, who rushed and did register on the carbon Pesach, and for those who did not register on it. Lemul, he's a real nice guy. And I'm going to do this for the people who are circumcised, and also for the people who unfortunately couldn't be circumcised. I'm going to do it for those who are contaminated, who are tamei, and for the people who are Torah who are pure. Over here, the halacha is kosher, because at the very least you shoehorned in the people who are allowed on. That's enough. Okay? Obviously, the Mishnah is coming to tell us the only time it's possible invalid is when you only do it for people who are no good. But if you do it at least for some that are good, it's okay. And the Gemara is going to talk about this. If you slaughter it before 12 o'clock in the afternoon, before midday. Remember, we learned this before. The carbon tamid, for every offering was brought twice a day. Once in the morning, which got everything started, and then once in the afternoon by 9.5 hours. What do you call it? That's when the carbon tamid was brought in the afternoon, the tamid shalbeinu habayim, and after that nothing happened except for maybe the ketairis maybe the ketoris and lighting up the lamps. But outside of that, nothing happens. So the carbon Pesach is the exception, that it was supposed to be brought after the carbon Talmud was done. After the carbon Talmud was brought in the afternoon, then the carbon Pesach was supposed to be done. That's one of the uniqueness of the carbon Pesach. If you do it kaidim chatzais, puzzle, it's no good. Mishum shenema beino abayim, because the pasuk clearly says
the afternoon. Yeah.
You shall slaughter the Pesach in the afternoon. But what happens? Shachtu kaibid l'tamid. It's already the afternoon. It's already after 12 o'clock. It's 12:30. It's 1 o'clock. We didn't bring the carbon tamid yet. We didn't do the tamid shalbeinu abayim. We didn't do the afternoon tamid. And now you shechted the Pesach, which really is supposed to be done after the tamid. Kosher. After the fact, it's kosher because at least you got it beinu abayim into the afternoon. Bilvad, but provided that another person comes along, another kohen comes along and steers the blood so it doesn't congeal.
Yes,
Until the carbon tamid is brought, the afternoon tamid is brought, and its blood is sprinkled on the altar, then you'll turn around and sprinkle the blood, the uncongealed blood of
the Pesach,
and then you'll set it. The im nizrak, but if you blow it and you got no patience, and you threw the blood, you sprinkled the blood of the Pesach before you sprinkled the blood of the afternoon tamid, de facto kosher, it's kosher, because at the end of the day, you did it in the afternoon. Very good.
Right.
So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabban, Keitzad shaloi la'achla. What does this mean? You slaughtered it for people who could not eat it. L'shum chayla or l'shum zakeh. If we're talking about where he shechted it, he slaughtered it, he offered it, he sacrificed it for the sake of a sick person and the sake of an old person. Okay, and again, an old person means a person that unfortunately their gums and their teeth can no longer eat meat. That's what it's simply.
Yitzhak, I was wondering today that we can blend the things. So, then maybe an old person would be considered oichlin.
So that is a very good question. Except, Daddy, you can make an argument. What my father is saying is that unfortunately, when you get to people of a certain age, whatever it is, and they have trouble swallowing, you start pureeing the food. Right? You puree the food and you turn it into mush.
So you puree the meat, yeah.
But the question then becomes, is that called royila achila? Since a normal person will be fe'ekled, will be disgusted by eating pureed food, it may not have a din on halacha of an oichel, of something that's worthy to eat. Since there is a mitzvah to eat the carbon Pesach, it has to be something that has a shame achila, that has a shame
achila.
Right. So I don't know. In my mind, I think that would not solve the problem. I don't know if that would solve the problem. But the question is a good question, and obviously is very applicable today. And today with implants and everything else, this is not such a problem as it used to be. But I remember, for example, my grandfather, Zechreinu Livracha, I remember one of the not greatest memories is seeing his teeth in a cup, right? Because that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
That was the way it was not that long ago, right? Today's kids don't know how good they got it. Anyways, so then, Keitzad Shaloilim in New York, what's the case of those who are not registered on it, that didn't go on the website to register? Nimnu Olav Chaborazu, when this particular group A, registered on it, but he went ahead and had in mind to slaughter it for the sake of another group. To put it this another way, in Boca Raton politics, the BJC, Boca Jewish Center, came together as a group to join together on a carbon Pesach, and the Kohen decided he's going to shecht it for the group of BRS, right? That's a pafuch. How do we know these things? How do we know that these really are ma'akiv and they invalidate the Tanu Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon learned b'michsas. The pasuk says that the payment should be taken b'michsas according to the number of people. Very simply, it's the rare case in the Torah. The Torah says this mitzvah has to be done numbered by people. It teaches us that a Pesach can't be slaughtered except if somebody is registered on it. I might have thought he can slaughter it for those who are not yet registered on it. Which will be like, okay, I was over on the mitzvah, I transgressed the commandment, but like anything else, but nonetheless, it should be valid after the fact. The classic case is a kohen who marries a divorcee. A kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. But if he marries a divorcee, right? If he marries a divorcee, the marriage is chal. The marriage is a marriage. She's an ashes ish. You were over on a lav. Okay. You were over on a lav. You transgressed a prohibition. But the bottom line is you did what you did. De facto, the marriage is marriage. Same thing over here. So good. I'm supposed to do it on the registered. I did it or not on the registered. Okay, I screwed up. Fine. But the carbon is still a carbon, right?
It's not mitzvah minamufra.
Okay, exactly. It's not, but it's even actually worse than that. It's not even just not the best mitzvah. In fact, I did wrong. I was over on a lav. Fine. Right. In that case of a kohen, he's over on a lav, but the kedusha is still chal. But here comes the pasuk Tamalayim. The pasuk says b'michsas, according to the numbers, tochaisu, you shall count. It's a very interesting. It's like a double ocean, a doubled up of the thing. According to the numbers of people, you should count. Obviously, if you're going according to the number of people, that means I got to know what's the number of people. What's the point of you shall count? Hakasav shana lovely akif. The pasuk repeats the requirement to make it an essential requirement. Rebbe Omer, Loshen Sarsihi. This is actually an Aramaic expression. Rashi, the third line from the bottom of Rashi. Arami Chachme Umois. It's a language of a slang of Aramic. It's actually Sarsi, comes from Syria. It actually is a dialect that comes from Syria. This is similar to the French that's spoken in Paris, as opposed to the French that's spoken in Montreal. Any Frenchman from Paris will tell you that the French that's spoken in Montreal is a bastardized version of French. Anyways, so Loshen Sarsihu, Ka'adam, like a person, who says it slaughtered this lamb for me. So anyways, okay, we found that you can't, if you slaughter it for those who are not registered, it's invalid, right? So now we're on 61.8.3. We're on the bottom. How do I know that just because I slaughtered for those who are incapable of eating it, it's no good? Because here's the logic. The chayla, the sick person or the old person, really have the mitzvah. They are mechuyev to bring a carbon Pesach. They are required to bring a carbon Pesach. Know what? There's a left field, a problem out of left field that they can't eat it. The chayla is sick in bed. The old person can't eat hard, strong meat. That's a side problem. That's a technical problem. Technically, I can't eat it. But in essence, I'm still a person that has the mitzvah of carbon Pesach. So why can't I at least slaughter the carbon Pesach for them, let them feel that they're getting part of their mitzvah? Because the pasuk says, Ish lefi ochloi tachayim. Each person
to be able to eat it.
Eat, you should count. The pasuk ikish oichlin lemenuyav. The pasuk deliberately comes and compares eating to those who are registered on it. So it turns out that eating is like registered. It's not just that you have the mitzvah. And technically speaking, I'm so sorry. I know I have it. I just can't do it because of a what we call in Yiddish, a zeitige problem, a side problem. The answer is yes, but the fact in this case, it's a side problem, not an essence problem. Nonetheless, the Torah is coming to tell us it's problematic. We're now on 61B1. It's exactly 8:45. We'll go on a little further. Again, I apologize if I'm not being so clear. I was up a whole night. As I started up, we had no nurse.
Oh, you're very clear. Yeah.
Good. Daddy, you're supposed to say that. You're my father. Here we go.
No, it's very
Here we
clear.
go. Okay.
You did a wonderful job.
I'm not your father. You're very clear.
Right.
There you go. There you go. So thank you guys. So 61B1. We're right on the top. Now, if he goes ahead and he slaughters like correctly, for those who are circumcised, right? Those who are circumcised, almanas, but with the thought, okay, that that the uncircumcised people will get atonement with his spraying of the blood. What's going on here? Carbon Pesach has nothing to do with atonement. It really means that what this means when it says kapara, it means
Rika.
What it really means over here is that the Arelim will be mekayim the mitzvah's Carbon Pesach. Remember, these Arelim, these uncircumcised, are an oinus. It's unavoidable. Their brothers had passed away from circumcision. They're not allowed to be circumcised. Okay? Yeah. But that means they really want to be part of the cup. This is the Carbon Pesach. It's the pacifism thing. So he says, listen, I'm going to slaughter this, of course, for the Miluim, for those who are circumcised. But I'm going to have in mind that when I do the sprinkling, I'm going to have in mind these guys who are Arelim, who really are good Jews, so that they should be at least part of what? They should be part of the carbon. They should be part of the carbon. Rav Chizda Amar, Posel, no good. Rabba Amar, Kosher, no, it is good. Rav Chizda Amar, Posel, Yesh Machsheves Arelim Bizarika. The attention for throwing the blood by Zarika works, it's valid, it's effective, and therefore it makes it invalid. Rabba Amar Kosher, Eimach Shavas Arelim Bizarika. There isn't. There is no such thing as Machshav Arelim Bizarika. It doesn't work. But why? Because Lamaisa, in fact, the Kohen shechted Dafka for those.
He's only Bashrit.
Yeah. What did he do? We were agreeing that he shechted it, he slaughtered it for the sake of those who could eat it, i.e. those who are circumcised. Yeah. So who cares that at the end in Zarika you're going to have in mind something else? We know that this carbon, even the Kohen who shechted it,
it's irrelevant. Yeah.
I'm saying it's only for the Mulin, for those who are circumcised. So Rabbi says this is not such a problem. Obviously, Rav Chizda says, yes, it is. I don't care. Bottom line is you had this thought. It's no good. Rabbi, how do I know? I'm in law. How do I know? The Tanya, because we learned. You might have thought that this uncircumcised person, this Orel, this unfortunate Orel, who didn't want to be an Orel, but is an Orel because the halacha says he wasn't allowed to be circumcised. If he now joins into the group, right, he should render the Pesach invalid for the circumcised members of the group that come with him. And let me tell you something. This is a reality. If Mashiach, Mitzvah Hashem, should come between now and Pesach, and so we all in BJC join together for this carbon, right? Here's the thing. What happens if we have a Russian? I know of a Russian. I'll give you an example. I know of a Russian fellow who's in his 80s, who only knows that he's Jewish because there was a J on his passport back in the 1930s. He even knows he's a Levi because his father told him he's a Levi, and he had no idea what a Levi was until my wife met him on the ice skating ring in Prospect Park. He is not circumcised, okay? Most of the Russian people born in the 20s and 30s, at the beginning of the Russian Revolution, were not circumcised. Recently, he said he wants to go ahead and be buried, even though he's agnostic, okay? He's not sure what he believes. He wants to be buried after 120 in a Jewish cemetery. He doesn't want to be cremated. He wants to change his mind. He wants to do things. But he has one problem. He's not circumcised. Is that going to be a problem? So I told him right away, it's not going to be a problem. Then I called my cousin, Zevi Weintraub,
It is a problem.
Called my cousin Zevi Weintraub. Daddy, there's no if it's a problem. Shimon Peres, great line from Shimon Peres. He said a problem by definition has a solution. If it doesn't have a solution, it's no longer a problem. Now it's a fact of life, and you got to live with it. This was a problem with the solution. I called Zevi, who's in charge of the Chesed Shalemes in New York. They have a plot for those people who cannot afford burial and all that up in Woodridge. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Call them up. The bottom line is, you know how they handle these Russians? Because he's already in his 80s, doing a bris milah would be life-threatening to him. Circumcising him in his 80s would be life-threatening. So he can't do it anyways.
Avraham was circumcised almost at 100.
Yeah, but Avraham lived to 175. 108, lived much longer. He had half his life to go. There happens to be that today they do not circumcise somebody who's above the age of 80. Actually, above the age of 75. Just like if a person reaches their 80s, they won't do a biopsy anymore. It's too dangerous. So therefore, there are certain things you get aged out. You're aged out. After 120, after this man will pass away, during the Tahara, when they go ahead and put him in the mikveh, that's when they're going to do the circumcision.
Oh, that's what they do.
Yeah, that's what they do. They circumcise before they do the Tahara. That's how they do it. Amazing. I didn't know that, but he said it's not. This happens. He said it's a story every single day. Every single day as they're passing away in their 80s and 90s and 100s, that's what's happening. They're being circumcised at the Tahara. It's a whole group of cases. It's not a problem. Like I said, it's a problem that has a solution. There's always a solution, right? That's one beautiful thing about Torah. If you know enough, there's a solution. So here's the case.
You have to die first.
You're not dead because you're not buried. As long as you're not buried yet, the neshama is still on this world, and then it works. So now, here we have our case. If Mashiach will come, and everybody in the shul joins together, and one person in the shul is in our group is uncircumcised, I might have thought he therefore invalidates all of us on this Korban Pesach. Vidinu, and it's logical. Hoyu v'arla paiseles v'tuma paiseles, since the intention to do it for an uncircumcised person or to do it for a tuma person invalidates, we could now make the following kal v'chayim. Ma tuma loy asaba mixas tuma kichol tuma. Just in the case of tuma, the Torah did not make partial intention for tuma like the total intention for tuma, meaning the only place where a tuma invalidates when you only have in mind people that are tuma. But if you have in mind both tuma people and non-tuma people, it's okay because I have someone to hang it on. That's good. Arla also mixes arla call arla. So too, an uncircumcised person does not invalidate when you also have in mind
everybody
people. Or maybe just the opposite. Maybe I got to look at this the other way. Just like an arla, an uncircumcised person by himself, invalidates the Korban Pesach, and zaman and the wrong time evaluates. What's the wrong time? The wrong time is something called pigul. Pigul means as you know, every carbon has its amount of time that it could be eaten. The yoim v'layla, yoim v'layla, a day and a night, meaning the day that it's slaughtered and the night that passes, or the day it's slaughtered, the next night and the next day, depending. And he has in mind, no, my intent is to eat it achar zaman, after the time frame of when I'm allowed to eat it biblically. Okay, if he does do that, that's called pigul. And if he does eat it, which is called again la'achar, after time he gets kores, he gets cut off. So hoyu v'arla posel uzaman posel, just like uncircumcised invalidates, and zaman, if you have in mind to eat it after its time frame, also invalidates. Ma zaman, osabom nixta zaman, kichol zaman, just like in the attention for the wrong time. Even my attention is only to eat a kazayas, an olive's volume, after the time frame. But the rest of it I'm going to eat today and tonight. It's only the volume, only a small piece that I'm going to eat after the Zman. Im kol zeh. It's called pigel, and the entire carbon gets puzzle, and you're not allowed to eat any of the carbon, even the parts that you were going to do correctly, right? Af arla asaba mixes arla kechal arla. Maybe I'll say, therefore, in a group, even if you have one uncircumcised, even if everybody else is circumcised, it's going to affect everybody and passel and invalidate everybody. So says the Gemara, let's do what we always do. Let's weigh the pros and cons. Let's see which one's got more. Should we derive a rule about something, i.e., oral, an uncircumcised person, that is not applicable to all other shar kabbanis, all other sacrifices? 61b2, okay? What are we talking about? Every other carbon, an oral could bring the carbon. He can't eat from it, perhaps, but you know what he could do? He could hire a shliach.
Shliach, yeah.
A shliach shalom kamaisai. A messenger is like the person. He can hire a person to represent him. Representation is like the person. He's allowed to do that. In Carbon Pesach, it says you're not allowed to, because it says kol oro lo yechol, but nowhere else does it say that. B'davar she'ein noig b'chol hazvachim, and something, a tumah, that is not applicable to all sacrifices, because the same thing, a tumah person can bring a sacrifice. He just has to have a shliach to go ahead. And al yochiach zaman, but that's not, we can't compare, don't compare it to time, where his intention is to eat it after the time. Pigel.
It goes by every carbon, yeah.
That's a rule in every sacrifice. Oy klach oy klach l'derech, right? Oy klach l'derech zu.
The other way, yeah.
Should we learn something about uncircumcised people for which there's no exception to the rule? In other words, on a Carbon Pesach, an uncircumcised person cannot bring the Carbon Pesach, cannot eat the Carbon Pesach. From something, the time attention, which also there's no attention to the rule. Pigel is pigel, and if you haven't in mind to eat it after the time frame, you blew it. And let's put aside tumah, because if everybody is tamei, we have a rule tumah hutra b'tzibur. Then if everybody is tamei, nobody is tamei. It's an interesting rule. So if all the kahanim are tamei, they're all tar. If all of Klal Yisrael is tamei, we're all tar. That's why the Chasam Sofer holds, since all Jews today are Tama Meis, Tuma Hutra B'tzibur, and the truth is, we're allowed to go up on the Har Abayis today and shecht and bring the Carbon Pesach. And he says, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. Who cares? The Kedusha, the holiness, is totally in Mokaim, in the place, not in the building. We don't know where the Mizbeach is. We know where the Mizbeach is. We know where the Evan is. We don't have the big day kahuna. He gets around that too. He says the only reason why we do not shech the Carbon Pesach is because the Arabs don't let us. This was an answer to a question that his father-in-law, Rabbi Akiva Eger, asked him. It's in the Shilas and Shuvas of the Chasam Sofer. One other thing, the difference between all other Kabbanis and Carbon Pesach, okay, just before we get to what it says here. The Rambam Paskins, every other carbon has one mitzvah, to shech, to slaughter it, and to eat it. Carbon Pesach is the only sacrifice that the Rambam brings down as two mitzvahs. One mitzvah is to slaughter it, one mitzvah is to eat it. Because in all other kabbanis, the halacha is that the carbon has to be slaughtered. And then the carbon needs to be oiskegessen, has to be eaten up. It's not a rule in you the person that you have to eat the carbon. It's a rule in the animal that when it is slaughtered, this sacrifice must be eaten up. So if you take 1,000,000 Jews and you give everybody just a drop, as long as it's completely eaten up, it's fine. Pesach is different. There's a din that you have to slaughter the Pesach, and then there's a mitzvah al matzah that every individual has to eat from the carbon Pesach. And the sheer achila is a kezayis, an olive volume. That's what makes Pesach uniquely different than every other animal. From every other animal. The Beis Halevi, the Chassam Sofer all explain this in the Rambam. Why the Rambam everywhere else has one mitzvah of slaughtering and eating, because there the eating up of the animal is not totally in the person. It's a rule in the animal needs to be eaten up. By Pesach, the rule is the person has to eat the carbon Pesach. That's a fundamental difference. Says the Gemara, Talmud Loima, Zois. Ma Zois. I know we're up to, you know what? Let's stop right here. We're going to stop right here. It's already 9 o'clock. We're going to stop by Ma Zois, even though, unless you guys want to go for 5 more minutes. I didn't realize the lady is. Charlie, are you okay for 5 more minutes? Or you want to stop here and we'll pick it up here tomorrow?
I can go another 5 minutes.
Okay.
You're very clear.
Okay. Give me 1 second. It's my wife. Give me 1 second. It's going to run to my wife. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. Here we go. Says the Gemara, Talmud Loima Zois. Therefore, the pasuk says Zois. This Zois Chukas HaPesach. This is the laws of the Pesach. Mazois, what's this? If it's coming to teach us that if your intent was just for uncircumcised people, that invalidates mixus and loy paslo, but only if it's partial, meaning for uncircumcised and for circumcised, that does not paslo. Hi mikol oral nafko. We learned that from the words by Pesach. It says v'chol oral, all,
but not partial. Yeah,
but that means partial. You could. Elalav hachikam. Right. So what is it to me? The Talmud loima v'chol oral, kula oral apostle. Only when you do it, the intention is for only uncircumcised. It's invalid. Mixus and loy pasla, but partial for circumcised and non-circumcised, it's valid. The chi table who adin l'zrika, the same rule is for sprinkling the blood on the altar. The kula oral meal pasla. If you do it just for uncircumcised people, it'll be pasul. Talmud loimed zois chukas haPesach. Right. This is the what do you call it? These are the laws of the Pesach offering. That means only during the shchita, the slaughtering, the first step of the 4.
Not bazrika, yeah.
Not shchita, halicha, kabbalah. I mean, shchita, kabbalah, halicha, and zarika. The other 3, that's not the problem. Aval zarika, afilu kula oral, and namaloy pasla. Because again, we said the whole purpose of the carbon Pesach is to eat it, which means it's all tied to its sacrifice. The chi tema my kula de zerika. What is the kula of the zerika? Where do you see it? The a machshavas oichlim bezerika. Because a machshava about eating is not important by the zerika, because that starts off the whole carbon is slaughtered with the idea of eating. So the most important part is by the slaughtering. The Rav Chizda says the other side. Adarabah, just the opposite, because he says that if you have an intention for uncircumcised people, that by zerika it does invalidate. Adarabah leidach gisa. This is the way to learn it. Talmud loima v'chol orel. All non-uncircumcised males should not eat of it. Kula orel pasal. That means only if you do it only for uncircumcised. Mixus and loy pasal. But if you do it for some for the circumcised and some for the non-circumcised, it does not invalidate. Aval zerika, but zerika, but if you sprinkle it, even mixasa, even for some, for those who are circumcised and those who are not circumcised, it would invalidate. But if you're going to say that the same law should apply by Zerika, until your intention is only to sprinkle for those who are uncircumcised, that's not valid. Talmud loyman zois. It comes to tell me zois. Shchita hu to make sasan loy pasla. It is only by shchita where only partial does not invalidate. Aval zrika afilu mixasin pasla. Even mixasin is pasla. The chitem, if you want to say my chamura zrika, why is zrika more stricter than the case of shchita? Because by shchita we say it partial does not invalidate. But by Zerika, by sprinkling partial invalidates, we're on 61b3. The reason is Deloy Mekabel Pigel Ela Bizrika. Because Pigel, once again, is only gets triggered by Zerika. Because this is the rule by Pigel. If somebody shechs, if sacrifices the carbon, slaughters the carbon to eat it with the intent to eat it after its time frame, and that's it. And when he does the rest of the avodas, he receives the blood, carries the blood, sprinkles the blood. He doesn't go ahead and have any other thoughts. Okay? Then it's pigel, it's no problem. But if in the other three, he ends up with another thought. For example, in other words, he says, I'm going to go eat it, not in its place, not in the courtyard. I'm going to eat it outside in Yerushalayim, let's say, right? Which is usher. Then the carbon becomes puzzle as a
not pigel.
For not for its place, but not for pigel. And shaloib and mekaimai is only a lav. You get malchus, you get lashes. You don't.
Not chorus, yeah.
So pigel is triggered only if you make it all the way to the sprinkling with no other invalidating intent. So maska blood. This is what we're going to do. So this is where we're stopping, right over here, because Rav Ashi is going to ask on this. He's going to say this can't be the explanation between the argument between Rav Chizda, who says that Zerika on the parts of an uncircumcised person invalidates, and Rabbah says it doesn't. And he's going to ask this question from over here.
So he's also saying Zrika is more important than Shchita.
Yes, that's
for
what
pigel.
Because of pigel. Because of it,
right.
It has, in essence, he's saying it's the strongest, it's the most stricter of all the triggers that we were dealing with today, essentially, because it creates a chorus problem if you get all the way there. Very good. So we're all the way on the bottom of 61b3, which is to say we're on the daf. Amazing.